Did you want to see that everything most of the people were expecting to hear? Go on a tube if you can.
Of course.
Now go on. Talk about the problem on tube. Sure, I was so saying about that. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming to Housmans, and obviously I'd like to thank Ken for agreeing to talk to you all at Housmans. Obviously I don't think Ken needs much introductions, but there's a couple of things that I think I should say. That this bookshop's been on this premises since 1959, which I think might be longer than you've been involved in politics.
Right.
Slightly longer, so that at least the shop, if none of us, have been here longer than Ken. The other one's a sort of personal anecdote that I should talk about. I'm sure people of a certain age will remember the GLC and all that sort of stuff. And it so happened that when I first came to London, I lived in lots of short-life housing cots, and I put myself down on every list that was possible. And one of them was called the GLC Mobility Scheme. And I think it was a couple of years after the GLC was abolished, and they realised they wanted to get rid of everything that had any connection with the GLC. They looked at these things, and that's how I got my council flat, because I kept in contact, and every time we moved, we did it. So indirectly, Ken, I have to blame you for ending up living in Hackney, where I've had about 25 or 30 years of a great life. I think, basically, as I say, I'm sure most of us know Ken, and although perhaps the shops, when I first worked here, we had gate switchboard upstairs and that sort of thing. I suppose the shop and Ken, we've had a parallel path, if you know what I mean, that sort of thing. So, go for it, Ken.
No, thanks very much.
No problem.
I am sorry for being late, but it was the tube limping along from Baker Street down to King's Cross. Oddly enough, I had no idea how big this was going to be when I started writing it. I assumed it'd be half this size. And it's part of the problem of starting your life from the beginning. And you just assume it will be boiled down to something quite small. And there's quite a lot. I didn't do terribly much about my time as a backbench MP because not very much happened then. Frankly, I always think the 14 years of my life I was a member of Parliament were the least productive years of my life, because first of all we're in opposition to Mrs Thatcher, then John Major, then I was in opposition to Tony Blair, and literally it's only in the last 2 years of my time as MP I was allowed to be on a committee. When I first got elected, it was that year that Diane Abbott, Bernie Grant and the others all got elected, and I put down my name to have it, because there was no question of getting an office in those days. I got a desk in the corridor. I put down my name for one, and ages went by and didn't get one. And Diane Abbott came up to me and she said she'd been to see the what's called the pairing with, who, as well as allowing people to miss a vote and pair with the Tory MP, allocated all the accommodation, and she was complaining about, been there about 5 months and still hadn't got anywhere to sit and work. And he said, well, you're second from the bottom on the list. And she said, who's bottom? He said, Ken Livingstone. Absolutely. So, broadly, I pursued my own path while I was in Parliament. None of the Labour leaders were going to give me any role whatsoever in doing anything for the party. But of course, for most people, and it's what predominates in the book, it's the period of the GLC, and then the mayoralty, and very much London politics and how London has changed. I was 14 when Housmans opened here, and London at that stage was an incredibly boring city. I remember even in the mid-1960s coming up with mates to go around Leicester Square and Piccadilly Circus, and they'd be almost empty on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday nights. It was still a city where people went to bed quite early, and there was none of the sort of great cultural diversity we've now got that has made it an absolutely amazing city. And part of the autobiography plots that change. And what's quite interesting, as well as being about me, I've also tried to put in there everything I discovered which is truly appalling and shocking. Like in 1965, the then Labour government discussing immigration in Cabinet, and the Labour Home Secretary, Frank Soskis, writes in his diary about the debate saying, if we don't do something about this immigration soon, all our people will be coffee-coloured. So when people pose this question of old Labour and new Labour, I have to say I never felt part very much of either. There was a brief period in the London Labour Party executive where slowly, year by year through the 1970s, the left made gains on the executive, and things really moved when Ron Todd came on and replaced the real old T&G apparatchik, very right wing. And there was a brief sort of 18 months when the left and the right were of equal numbers, and the balance was held by three members of the militant tendency. And you would assume as a revolutionary Marxist group they'd have been with us on everything, but when we raised the question of making a stand in the 1981 GLC election about lesbian and gay rights, I remember them saying, this is a byproduct of capitalism. Under socialism there will be no homosexuality. And a lot of that old Labour position was very, very backward on the issues which are now central to our politics, and even, finally, the Tory party has caught up with and moved in that direction. And so it's very much a book about London changing as much as I changed and the things I was involved in. But what having lost the election to Boris, I just sat down and started writing it. And as I thought it'd take about a year, and it ended up taking 3, because there's so much I actually wanted to get in about the things that I'd learned. Not just things about how you work in politics, because I've been really lucky in a sense that for about half my time in politics I've had some sort of role rather than just being sitting there in opposition. And it started out in 1971. I was lucky in the sense I joined the Labour Party, and at the time I was pretty much of a centrist. I joined in 1969 as almost all the socialists were leaving. And it was mainly because I had a good local Labour MP, John Fraser, who I got involved politically first in trying to get American draft resistors into Britain, because I'd met some when I'd been hiking around Africa, so they could avoid the draft and avoid being sent to Vietnam. Mitt Romney managed to do the same thing. I had to say, if he didn't want to come here and live in Britain. All those very rich Republicans seemed to get their deferments, but we were getting lefties into the country. And here was a Labour MP quite happy and proud to take those issues up in a way that many Labour MPs weren't. He's also, because we were living in Norwood, it was a sort of south-east chunk of Lambeth, one of the few Labour MPs to actively go out and encourage black people to join the party in 1969, and to try and promote them and get them onto councils and take up their issues. And we actually had white members of the Labour Party leave because they thought the MP was doing too much for black people and so on. So I joined as everyone else was leaving, and with the result that 18 months later I was on the council and made vice chair of housing. So all the ghastly mistakes you saw Blair make and you see Cameron and Osborne making now, because they'd never run anything in their lives, I was fortunate enough to make as a 26-year-old when nobody was watching on Lambeth Council. I caught myself, I almost said to Blair, first time I met him after I'd become mayor, that I found it fascinating watching him make the sort of mistakes in government I made as a councillor. Now, I thought most properly wouldn't necessarily respond well to that, so I didn't decide to make it. But it is one of our weaknesses, and this has become more of a problem, that whereas politics would be people join through serving in local government, or perhaps 30 or 40 years in the trade union movement on our side, and running a small family business or a quite large business on the Tory side, and came into politics having done something else in their life first. Now, of course, we've got this situation that 14-year-olds start having wet dreams about being president or prime minister, and they all go and do politics at university and then straight into being a researcher for somebody. And because we've had this two very unusual long periods of one-party government, 18 years with the Tories and then 13 years of Labour, and literally since, throughout the 20th century, we all never had a party win a third term in government. People were always out, usually after about 8 or 9 years, and so that people coming into government had already served in a cabinet, had learned some of these things. And I think a lot of our problems now that, people just find, for Blair and Cameron, the first thing they've ever run in their lives is the whole bloody country. A bit like, I have to say, and I think this is perhaps why Obama was so poor in that debate, he must have struggled, having only ever been a community organiser, and suddenly you're trying to run in a fairly dysfunctional system of government which was designed so no one could actually govern. And I suspect a lot of his poor performance must be, he knows what he wanted to achieve and how little of that he's managed to achieve because of the obstruction of Congress. If we look back now to the last time we had a recession on this scale, the Great Depression, Roosevelt was incredibly lucky. He got elected after they'd had 3 years of recession, so the blame was firmly locked on the Republicans. And he started a public works program. He had a big majority in Congress. He actually increased that majority in the midterm elections. And at the next presidential election, he had 6 years where you could ram stuff through. And of course, Obama had just 2 years, and then mad people, the Tea Party, had taken over the Republican Party, and you've got climate change deniers, creationists. It's terrifying thought, actually. For the largest economy in the world, which has got nuclear weapons, these complete nutters might be on the verge of taking control of it in November. But I was lucky, as I worked my way up. I got to the GLC. Now, I have to say, as a working class kid, Tory parents, I grew up reading the Daily Express. God help me, it's amazing I ended up voting Labour. I was the first person in either side of our family ever to vote, not to vote Conservative. I had an uncle actually who was in the black shirts in the 1930s, so there's nothing in my background that would have tipped me into that. But it was two things that got me involved in politics. As you all know, my main interest was natural history. When I left school, I wanted to work at London Zoo. They didn't have any vacancy, so I ended up working at the Royal Marsden Hospital as a technician. But I got more interested in politics after Harold Wilson was elected as leader of the Labour Party in January or February 1963, and then coming home on the 22nd of November that year and turning on the telly and seeing Kennedy being assassinated and watching all that unfold. Those two events unleashed an interest in politics, but it took me 5 years to get around to joining the Labour Party. And please don't laugh, but partly that's why I didn't see any point in joining the Labour Party, because I thought Harold Wilson was so good, all the problems of poverty would be resolved within the 5 years of a Labour government. God, I was naive. But having got involved and developed that interest, I moved to the left on a pragmatic basis as I saw the sort of centrist policies of Wilson fail, of Lyndon Johnson getting mired in that war. I moved leftwards under the events of the 1960s and early 1970s. And I also completely fell in love with local government, because in those days you could do things in local government. There were virtually no central government controls. None of this stuff that Cameron announces there's going to be a freeze of the council tax for another year. You could actually, when I was first elected, you could borrow money for major investment projects without the permission of government. You tried to get the money out of the government because it was a cheaper way of doing it, but you could actually go to the bond markets and borrow money to build things. And a huge program of reconstruction after the war, a lot of that done on that basis. And so I fell in love with this. Nerdy kid who had no expectation. I failed my 11 plus, dropped out of school, and I suddenly found myself vice chair of housing in that. But 2 years later, I was on the GLC at a time when we were making promises to free freeze fares, leading to their abolition. God, now I think people have to work about 6 weeks or 8 weeks in some cases to earn the money to pay the bloody fares to go to work. And the other thing, and this may seem incredible now, to municipalise all private rented property in London. That was our campaign manifesto in 1973. Of course, along came the oil crisis, the Labour leadership ratted on it. I went off with Tony Banks and a small group of left-wingers resisting this. We, of course, lost the election after 4 years of breaking all our promises, and then 4 years later I came back as leader, and we tried to actually push through a whole programme of quite radical measures in the face of total opposition from Mrs Thatcher's government. And the media, one has to say. I love local government, being able to do things for your local constituency or whatever, and you could see you made real changes and you saw them being delivered, whereas as a Member of Parliament you discuss laws that somebody else might actually carry out somewhere. But I hadn't expected that there'd be much interest in the Labour GLC in 1981. I mean, my entire previous 10 years in politics, I'd gone round, even in that election campaign in 1981, addressing meetings of about 5 or 10 people if you're lucky. I don't think I'd ever spoken to a meeting with more than 30 people, except internal Labour Party meetings and so on. And the night I took over from Andrew McIntosh, now a little internal coup, Mrs Thatcher was addressing the Scottish Conservatives, and she set the tone for the media when she said, what has happened in London is, a real warning. They seek to impose on the people of Britain the sort of tyranny the people of Eastern Europe want to escape from. And I thought, well, we want to cut the fares and build some housing. And there's actually, some of you may have seen that film or read the book, Frederick Forsyth's book, The Fourth Protocol. And it got dropped out, the film. But it's about an attempt by the Communist Party to stage a takeover. It's set in the 1980s, Kinnock's leader of the Labour Party. And there's this wonderful bit, someone outside happily waving it. It's a complete work of fiction, of course, but Frederick Forsyth writes there that he's got, Kim Philby, he has as a key advisor to Leonid Brezhnev, and Kim Philby devises this plan that Labour will get elected under Neil Kinnock, then there'll be a coup, he'll be replaced, and the party will swing to a pro-Soviet position. And he says that the test for this has been Ken Livingstone's coup at the GLC, a coup of which Lenin would be proud. And so it's easy now to think what was all the fuss about, but there were a layer of people from Thatcher and the Tory press who genuinely feared that what had happened at the GLC was going to be the forerunner, which would end up, with East German troops on the streets of London or something. So it was a hysterical period of time. Every aspect of my life was worked over. Kelvin Mackenzie was editor of The Sun at the time. He put a team of reporters on investigating every aspect of my life. They came back after several weeks, said it's very boring, goes to lots of meetings, he's got some newts. And he couldn't believe this, so he sent them all off to do it all again. The Tory party did some, they first of all cited a load of smears, because having come out for lesbian and gay rights, they assumed no one would conceivably do this unless they were gay themselves. And Tory Central Office took the journalist Trudy Pack, who worked for the Sunday Mirror, and said, we have conclusive evidence that Ken Livingstone was at a pub in the East End of London where he was buggered by 6 men in succession. So this was unremitting, and day after day, screaming headlines in the press, and it had a dramatic effect. Within 3 months, my poll rating was down to 18%. And then the law lords overturned our fares cut. And basically from then on, it picked up. By the end of the GLC, there was majority support, some of it overwhelming, for almost all our policies except lesbian and gay rights. That got up to 40% support. But what will be amazing for many is our single most popular policy, even a majority of Tory voters supported it, was declaring London a nuclear-free zone. It's something that was purely symbolic. And a majority of Tory supporters thought that. Well, I have to say, I do hope Labour, when we're discussing now what we need to cut, the idea we're going to spend £100 billion over the next 30 years on another generation of nuclear weapons, which we can't even bloody fire, because we don't have the targeting system. We don't have an independent... We'd have to get... You could only fire them if the Americans agreed, you know. At least the French have had the good sense to have a targeting system, then start their own nuclear war. The idea we'd spend £100 million, and we can't start our own nuclear war. What's the point in all of this, you know? But that was our most popular move. But it was just that sort of campaigning. Ed Miliband, when I first met him after he became leader, said, you won't know this, but I used to go to school every day with on my satchel my Save the GLC sticker and so on. And we turned it round. And it's quite interesting because right the way through, with the exception of some of the smears about my sexuality, and then once they decided I wasn't going to smears about my promiscuity, but I mean, overwhelmingly all the attacks on me from the media were about my politics. And when I came to run for mayor, and it was pretty much of a walkover, effectively I'd been identified with a series of policies that people like the idea of, you know, building homes for rent again, cutting the fares, democratic control of the police, all of that, restoring the bus service, negotiating with the IRA, very unpopular at the beginning, but you know, even Tony Blair came around to doing that in the end. So the media attacks actually made me more popular. And I only really realised this after I'd lost the election to Boris this summer. But about 4 years ago, the Tory press, the Mail, the Standard and the Telegraph changed the strategy. They stopped attacking me about my policies. There was a series of smears that my administration had been corrupt and cronyism. This time I was a tax dodger and an anti-Semite. And in a way we've adopted that sort of American politics. It's not a serious debate about issues, it's smear, smear, smear. And I have to say, well, it was very funny listening to the Day programme this morning, Obama's latest campaign ad attacking Mitt Romney because he's going to do away with Sesame Street. I'm not certain it really deals with the serious issues that confront the American people. And I don't know how much serious debate is going to be about economic issues. And I've come on to those because one of the things I've done in the book, I included all the things, I mean, it's about me and my political role and what I've done. I've also included in the book all the things I discovered that most people don't know about, which are truly shocking. And I mean, it's quite, when I sent the manuscript off to the publisher's favour, they sent back a 24-page letter of queries from the libel lawyer. And they came up with the idea, you can't say that, because they really were nervous about a lot of this. And it's quite interesting, when it came out, quite a lot of the right-wing media refused to review it. The Board of Deputies announced we won't be reading it and things like that. So rather than a screaming series of outrageous attacks on it, the idea is we don't really want people reading things like this. And one thing that, you know, particularly shocking, given that we live with the constant threat of terrorism, it claimed 52 lives in London back in July 2005, is the origins of that. I dug out, I mean, we had to wait 50 years for Macmillan's diaries to be published. Macmillan, when he's Foreign Secretary in 1954, writes in his diary, he's very worried about the Saudi regime because they're now awash with oil and they're using it to fund the Wahhabi sect, which is an absolutely minute strand of Islam, very intolerant. The only thing we knew about the Wahhabis was they killed Gordon at Khartoum, the Mahdi. But he writes in the book that they're using this money to spread a very intolerant strand of Islam around the whole world. Pity that didn't, you know, we had to wait 50 years to discover that. But even worse, in 1979, the sainted Jimmy Carter, who's now seen as a wonderful president because he wasn't personally corrupt, he did try and do his best on those issues, but he had a visceral fear and hatred of communism. And that did an awful lot to disrupt what could have been a much better presidency. But the CIA went to see him in, I think it's May 1979, to say there's a very unstable government in Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union is very nervous about this because there's this sort of 40 million Muslims living in that area broadly adjacent to it, Soviet citizens. They're very worried about the intolerance and that strand of intolerant Islam spreading and so on. And CIA say to Carter, and the exact words are in there, that if you start giving arms to these Islamists, it will provoke Russia to invade, and it will become their Vietnam and bankrupt them. And he took that decision that summer. Of course, by the end of the year, the Soviet Union invaded, it did become their Vietnam. But the sainted Jimmy Carter set in place that destabilisation. And of course then the CIA flooded billions of pounds in to provide armaments for the Taliban. The Saudi regime was funding Al-Qaeda and more extreme forms. And therefore, when 9/11 happened, and when 7th of July happened here, it was effectively, the fuse that Carter and the West had set back in 1979, finally coming to claim lives in the countries that set that off. And still today, we have this appalling double standard about some of the regimes we prop up, like Bahrain, the denunciations, all that. So I've all sort of stuff like that. But the one bit in the book where everybody said this can't possibly be true, we only discovered, and it buried away a tiny snippet in the Guardian in the mid-1990s after the official papers 50-year rule came out. And it was a cabinet minute from Eden to Churchill saying he just discovered that the governor of the Bank of England, Sir Montague Norman, had transferred a large part of Britain's gold reserves to Nazi Germany. And this was easy to do because they were held in the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, involved moving from one vault to another. And Churchill just goes berserk, of course. Says a lot about the arrogance of bankers. They think they can float above any national responsibility. But no one could believe this to be true. I think it says a lot about the sort of mentality of bankers, that have no real loyalty to any particular people or society they're in, but loyalty to some concept of an international financial system. Because Montague Norman thought World War II couldn't possibly intervene to override financial obligations, And now instead of hanging the bugger for treason, it was all buried and suppressed, and they got away with it for 50 years. But then, living through this crisis, I was involved in a debate last night about we should love our bankers. And it's an organisation which doesn't represent the normal cross-section of the British class system. And so that when we turned up there to vote, and it was about 308 thought we should love our bankers. And there seemed to be a lot of bankers in the audience. And there was only about 114 thought we shouldn't. And then there was about 200 couldn't make up their bloody mind. We had a very good debate about this. And I extracted from my book there some things which I find just breathtaking. And one is a statement by George Bancroft, who was Navy Secretary under President Polk in the 1840s. And he says this: "No man or body of men ought ever to be invested with such exorbitant powers that in the case of misdemeanour the guilty cannot be arraigned without plunging the country into distress." This is his response to the fact that the Bank of America tried to overthrow President Jackson by creating a crash, because, and this is the defining point, and this all comes out of Arthur Schlesinger's book, The Age of Jackson. It's about 70 years old now. The Bank of America's boss, Nicholas Biddle, plainly preferred a speculative economy with quick expansion, huge risks, huge gains, willing to take the chance of depression for the opportunities of boom. And one thing that depressed me a bit, because I like to draw on the lessons of history in my politics, 2 or 3 times in the recent campaign, people at me say, "Why do you keep going on about the past?" But the truth is that it just keeps recycling. And it's quite clear that 200 years of modern capitalism has been a series of incredible financial booms, catastrophic crashes, then governments imposed proper restrictions, then 50 years pass, everyone's died who was involved in those great debates. The bankers persuade the government to remove the restrictions, then another boom and another crash. And here we are still debating whether or not we'll impose the Vickers report to separate what they call the high street retail and the investment functions of banking. Well, it's not much investment, it's mainly bloody speculation and gambling. And so I've tried to get into that book, all those lessons I've learned, all the things I think we need to keep drumming home to people. because this is, I think, and I suppose every time we come up to election, politicians think it's the most important election we face. There's been 2 elections in my lifetime that changed our politics and our society. The first, I was only 2 months old when Attlee's government was elected, but it created that social democratic consensus, full employment and a welfare state. And the Tory governments of the 1950s continued that consensus. They didn't expand it, but they didn't try and roll it back. And I remember Tory MPs saying, every time it's a Labour government, it ratchets us farther to the left, and we don't ratchet it back. And that government built a consensus that lasted until Thatcher. Then Thatcher smashed it and created a new consensus around a particularly perverted version of Friedman's economic theory. And tragically, when we got a Labour government with a huge majority and the economy in a fairly benign state, and the Tory party having a collective mental breakdown over Europe, when we could have recast the whole of our politics, they carried on with the consensus you know. We had endless lectures from Blair about we can't go back to the trade union powers of the past. Councils have got to move away from their committee structure. We've got to have directly elected mayors and all the personality politics. And the same was true in America. Clinton won, and it was Clinton that repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which had separated the banking functions that Roosevelt pushed through after the Great Depression. So I use this book, one, because I know my kids won't be interested in what I did until after I'm dead. When I was writing this, I realised how little I knew about my parents. And I think perhaps before telly and radio, people sat around and talked about their past and their family history, but largely that's forgotten. But it's also there for people coming into politics to not repeat the mistakes I made, but also to try and educate people to the scale of the change we face, because I think this coming general election could be one to rank with 45 and 79. And I find Ed Miliband impressive. No one believed me when I said this after he got elected. But there's a defining difference about Miliband and the Labour leaders I've had to deal with before. Blair and Brown, I'd meet them. They would never say no to my face. They would never say you're wrong. There'd be a long, inconclusive debate, and they said, we'll get back to you. Months have passed. They never did. Ed Miliband says, I disagree with that, directly to your face. When I was with Blair and Brown, there was never a focus on anything beyond the next election, and often not beyond next week's bloody opinion poll. Whereas when I'm Ed Miliband or Ed Balls, they're talking about how they want Britain to be 20, 25 years down the road. And I think although both of them were inside the last Labour government, I think they've learned a lot of the mistakes that government made and won't repeat them. But we've got to maintain that pressure and push them forward in the right direction, because there'll be overwhelming opposition and hostility from the civil service, from the media. And I think that in the small signs that Ed Miliband set out, in standing up to Murdoch, in starting to talk about predatory or productive capitalism, it opens up issues which are important about changing the whole nature of our society and shifting our politics decisively in a different direction. And I think that's important, not just because we do need a fair society. There's no reason why we can't reverse the doubling of inequality we've had since Thatcher got elected. If Thatcher could double inequality, we could halve it, just roll it back to where it was with a more progressive tax system. With actually just turning around and saying, well, minimum wage, £6 an hour. If you want to get people off of benefits, make sure you're paying decent bloody wages so it makes sense to work, rather than demonising people who are on benefits. But also because, and I think, and I touch on this at the end of the book, we face catastrophic climate change. One of my rows with the Labour government was with my science background, have always been fascinated by what was happening and developing in the debate around climate change. And we set up, because mayors all around the world have to deal with the day-to-day running of the city, whereas national governments talk about laws. And so mayors tend to be much more focused on immediate problems and can see the problems that are coming. When I went to New York when Bloomberg had become mayor, Bloomberg knows that the violence of hurricanes will continue to increase with global warming. In North America, there's never been a hurricane greater than force 2. There will at some point be a force 3 and a force 4. And because the mayor of New York has more powers than any other mayor in America, he's actually instituted a program to prepare for that. They have built shelters for 2 million New Yorkers, because 2 million of New Yorkers will have to be moved from the coastal areas and places like Manhattan when that hurricane strikes. When I was there, went to see the control centre they've established. It's about 50 times the size of this. They identified where to move people. They are ready for catastrophic climate change when it hits them. I contrast that with, I've constantly been saying climate change will be much worse, much quicker than we think, because although you've had big increases in global temperature over the last 500 million years, they've happened over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. They've never happened in 200, which is, we've already seen a rise of 0.8 Celsius, and governments talk about keeping it to just 2 degrees Celsius. There's no chance of containing it to that already. I met the chair of the International Panel on Climate Change, Dr. Chauri, about in 2007, and I was saying I don't need any chances. We passed the tipping point. There's no hope of that. It's just a question of how bad it's going to be. And so I was always arguing with government ministers saying we need to build a new Thames barrier, and it needs to be bigger and a bit farther out to sea. When we opened the Thames barrier in 1982, we raised it twice a year. Now they raise it twice or 3 times a month. And lo and behold, we're now told instead of the North Polar ice melting by the end of the century, it might be as early as the next 20 years. And we need to prepare for that in the same way that Bloomberg's prepared. But it's much more than that. Climate change will be truly catastrophic. If we get it wrong, the best we can hope for is a few 100 million people living in what is now Canada or Siberia. Absolute devastation. And it's the governments we elect over the next decade are going to be decisive in whether we put in place the changes, and they're not changes that are impossible. We worked out, because I said we set up an organisation, because mayors all waiting for their governments to move on this. We set up a thing called the C40, the mayors of the 40 largest cities on Earth. They meet every 2 years. Boris has carried on going to the meetings to discuss all the different technologies we can use, learn from each other, and come together to do bulk purchasing. 3 or 4 cities together can get very good deals. And we set up a unit at City Hall, and it came up with the conclusion we could reduce London's carbon emissions 60% in just 20 years, just by insulating, shifting more people to public transport, cutting out the nonsense that 60 to 70% of all the energy generated by our energy system, whether it's nuclear, gas or electricity, is wasted because it's very far from the point of transmission. It gets lost during transmission. And we were exploring generating energy locally, renewable forms within the city, so you cut that dramatically. You insulate every home. I've done it with my own home. You put 4.5 inches of insulation on all the exterior walls. Kids come home, tear all their clothes off and run around naked because it's so intolerably hot. All these things around, they don't involve a miserable quality of life. We don't have to sort of grow our own muesli and live in a mud wattle hut or something. It's just about eliminating the waste and turning away from the rampant consumerism. Sir Martin Sorrell is no lefty, head of the world's biggest advertising agency, made a speech about a year ago saying at some point the advertising industry will have to change from encouraging people to buy things to persuading them to save. And that's the world I grew up in. That's my parents who've been through the Depression, been through the war, and wasted nothing. We've moved into a society where we're encouraged to consume what we don't need. And it's the point I end on. It's, goes right the way up to the top of society, that you're never happy. Someone's always got more than you. Someone always has better holidays, a bigger house, just a bigger car, whatever. This is what the consumer industry that started in America in the 20s and spread to Europe in the post-war period has built into our way of thinking. And as I say in the book, I met some of the richest people in the world, and they're so bloody miserable because there's always someone richer than them. I mean, Robert Maxwell, who used to own the Daily Mirror, he stole his staff's pension fund because he was only a multi-millionaire, but he couldn't live like a billionaire. And he clearly committed suicide when he was about to come out. But Conrad Black, I think he's still inside, and the owner of the Telegraph, stole from the shareholders because he could only live like a multi-millionaire. There is no point getting off this escalator of greed. It threatens all life on our planet, and it doesn't provide a decent quality of life. And so it isn't just about winning the next election, tackling climate change. It's actually about rediscovering what actually makes our life worthwhile. It's our relationships within our family, our work colleagues, and what we can put back into society. If we get that, that's what I mean by socialism. It's about that nature of being part of a community that value and values you. Thank you very much.
Questions? Ken be only too pleased to answer questions. So get the tomatoes and everything ready. Come on. Yeah, okay, yeah, go on.
That boy just screaming from the rooftops about what the Titonians are doing to the country.
Well, I think we do plug away about that. And there is this constant emphasis on, the toffs and all of that. And we keep going on about Andrew Mitchell, I think captured brilliantly the way they see us. And I think what's quite interesting, I grew up in the 1950s when the Tory cabinet was dominated by all Etonians. But there's a difference. The sort of people that ran the Tory party in the 1950s most of them had been in World War I, and the younger backbenchers had been in World War II. People like Edward Heath fought in the war. And so that layer of Tory leaders, predominantly public school and old Etonians, had actually very much engaged with the working class. They led working class men into battle. They had a respect for the working class. They saw the courage, they saw the intelligence that was there. And I think that's why it was very much of a one-nation Tory government in the 1950s. Cameron, he first became politically aware during Thatcherism, where there was a sort of, smash the unions, get rid of council housing, and all of that. And that spread culturally. If you ask, there's that very good book, Owen Jones, done the Chavs. You ask now about working class, people don't think of those heroic men fighting. They actually think of shameless, There's been a demonisation of the working class. And I think, Cameron most probably has not really ever engaged with working class people except the servants at Oxford, when he went up to Oxford, There just has been no engagement. He's lived in a very small, elite, snotty set, this Chipping Norton set, with ghastly people like Rebecca Brooks and George Osborne, all that. Horrific. They had no understanding in the way that previous generations of Tory leaders did. So we will plug on about it. I have to say, I've got one of the things I say now, in 1981 in that GLC election, the Evening Standard had taken a decision to do everything possible to prevent Labour winning because they knew I would take over, and they wanted to keep Horace Cutler there. And one of their reporters had found Horace Cutler was having an affair, but the significant point, he was having an affair and he was using one of the flats above Baker Street Station, which are owned by London Transport. And London Transport rule was that you could only have one of those flats if you had no other home. It couldn't be a second home. So here's the leader of the council, who was, presided over London Transport, taking one of these flats and using it to have sex with his mistress. And the Standard reporter found this out, and the editor said, we're not using that. Our objectives, get the Tories back. So that I get this phone call, and he said, I need to talk to you. And he gives me the straw and says, will you use it? I took this and said, no, I don't want to use that. We'll take the flat off him once we've won. I want to win that election on the issue of cutting fares and building council homes and tackling bad landlords. And now everyone in politics today would say, what a complete plonker you were. You know, you should have gone with that and run with it. But, I mean, I think there's an interview in The Guardian that during the last mayor election, and the reporter came to the conclusion, actually, you'd be a very good mayor, but you're not a very good candidate, are you? Because I just can't stand this crap. I came into politics because I'm in love with ideas, and the trivialisation of it has got worse and worse. If I compare the last two mayor elections with the GLC election in 1981, when we had 3 television channels then, BBC One, 2 and ITV. The BBC set aside the 4 Thursdays before polling day in the prime time Thursday evening slot after what's then the 9 o'clock news. So from 9:30 to 10:30 to 4 debates about the GLC election. One solely devoted to transport, where I was a spokesperson on. They were question time debates, big audience. One on housing, one on industrial policy and employment, and a final debate between the leaders. 4 debates in prime time. Only in the southeast, London, the southeast, it wasn't national. What happened at the mayoral election this time? There was supposed to be a debate, question time debate with Dimbleby. They pulled it on the grounds it's only a local London issue. So, I mean, not only that, the Today programme, you would have thought, I mean, the Today programme is currently interviewing all the authors up for the Booker Prize. Very good. But they decided it wouldn't, no interest in interviewing the 4 main candidates for Mayor of London at the last election. So the dumbing down that started with Murdoch corruptly being able to take over the Times and all that continues apace. That's why I'm loath to slip back into all this, Obama using bloody Sesame Street and all that. Might be a good throwaway line in the debate, but that as an advert, when you're in the worst economic situation for 70 years, it pisses me off, really. Sorry I went on so long. I can't remember what the question was. Who's next?
Don't be shy.
Thanks for what you did for Canley Street Natural Park.
I don't love it.
And thank all the newts say thank you to you too. And was it a battle initially to get the Thames barrier in place? Was there opposition to that?
Well, the Thames barrier was the end result of the Great Flood in 1953, when Eastern England, East Anglia and lots of London flooded. I think 100 people died, something like that. So between 1953 and 1973, there was 20 years of debate about what to do about it. So after 20 years, they took the decision the GLC should build a Thames barrier. Just literally, it was, I think, the first couple of meetings I ever went to at the GLC, having just been elected, they took the decision to build it. They made a big mistake of having 3 giant engineering firms form a consortium. And so the consortium was freestanding. So none of the firms that set up the consortium, we couldn't get to their assets if anything went wrong. And there's a real scam, because each month the completion date for the Thames barrier slipped a month. And so it was just, we were making no progress at all. Then we were thrown out, Horace Cup came in. And one of the things he got right, he realised they were just screwing us because they're getting more and more money, the price is going up. And so we offered a deal that there'd be a huge bonus for everybody from the chief executive to the tea lady if it was completed at a set date. And immediately we were making a month's progress every month. That influenced me greatly when I came to start awarding contracts at the GLC and as mayor, that you really got to tie these bastards down, and civil servants seem hopeless at it, frankly. So that was that was what happened. But on Canley Street, for those of you who don't know it, if you just, walk up the side of St Pancras Station, between St Pancras and King's Cross, you get to the end and you see a load of trees. This was a plan to have a lorry park when I was leader of the GLC. And I think somebody came to me and said, it would be nice and nature reserve for local kids because there's bugger all around here. And it was it's been a brilliant success. Tens of thousands of school kids go there. You walk into it, it's like you're in the countryside. It's amazing. It's free, and they were going to build the Channel Tunnel rail link through it, and we managed to create. So this is what I loved about being in local government. You can do a small thing, adventure playground, your local city or something like that, and you see an immediate result. It's brilliant. If you haven't seen seen it go and look at it, it's great. Take your kids.
There's a tremendous sense of ownership of it too, by the parents and the children and the teachers. You know, they all feel it's theirs.
Yeah.
And thank you for that.
Well, no, we have to keep, I'm sure there'll be endless suggestions about that. Must be an incredibly valuable plot of land now, given the gentrification and all that's happened around here. You know, but I always have to keep an eye on that.
Oh, yeah.
At the back.
Yes. Hello, Janet. For me, Ken, the Labour Party is a socialist party. I did actually send a question in by email. So I understood, I haven't lived in the country for 25 years, but I understand you went out in the Labour Party. So my question is, you see, I feel that the Labour Party has become more and more like the Conservative Party. It's even more capitalist. And in fact, I feel that in the sense that it's becoming more and more socialist, there's no alternative for anyone who does want, you know, wants something that is an alternative to capitalism. And the problem is, I feel that because they want to redistribute the wealth, they want capitalism to work actually better, you know, in that sense. So my question is, well, first of all, I'd like to see whether, you know, you consider yourself a socialist, and secondly, whether you think that the Labour Party could be made to become more socialist internally, or whether it could, you know, go against capitalism, or whether you think in this country there should be some alternative, you know, some new movement, some new party. I lived many years abroad. I've lived in El Salvador. I've also been in Venezuela, which I think we should be like pleased to have as well. 80% people voted. And also that, in the sense that, anyway, forget, anyway, get on the question.
I joined the Labour Party in 1969, so we've been through 1968, you know, London, Paris, Rome, Berlin, we shall fight and we shall win, and